I was 3 hours into replacing a rotted dock section on Burrard Inlet when the floatplane landed. That was not unusual. Floatplanes landed on the inlet all the time. What was unusual was that this one taxied all the way to the far end of Whitmore Marine's private dock. The engine cut out, and a woman stepped off the pontoon, like she had done it 100 times in heels, that had no business being anywhere near saltwater. I was on my knees with a drill in one hand and a cedar plank balanced across my thigh. My waterproof jacket was soaked through at the elbows. My boots had been wet since 7 in the morning, which was fine because they were always wet. That was the job. Whitmore Marine Restoration did not deal in showroom boats. We dealt in the ones people had given up on. Old wooden sailboats, heritage vessels, fishing trawlers that had been in families longer than most marriages. If a boat was worth saving, I wanted to find out why. The woman crossed the dock without looking down once. She had dark hair pulled back, a wool coat the color of slate, and a leather bag over one shoulder that probably cost more than the outboard motor I had rebuilt last Tuesday. She stopped about 6 feet from where I was kneeling and looked at the boat, then at me. "You're Miles? Sutton?" I set the drill down and stood up. "That depends on what you broke." She did not smile. "I'm Vera Ashworth." I knew that name. Anyone who had spent time around Vancouver's waterfront knew Ashworth. Ashworth Pacific had been running coastal ferry routes, private charters, and marine hospitality up and down the BC coast for 3 generations. Heritage vessels turned into boutique experiences. Old passenger ships converted into floating lodges. There was an Ashworth Cove somewhere north of Tofino that showed up in every travel magazine that wanted to look like it had discovered something. They had not discovered anything. The Ashworths had built it before those writers were born. I wiped my hands on a rag. "All right, what can I do for Ashworth Pacific?" She held my gaze. "I need a fiancé by Friday." For a second, the only sound was the water against the dock pilings and a gull somewhere overhead deciding its opinion. My guy Derek, who had been coiling rope about 15 feet behind me, made a sound that was not quite a cough. I looked at her. "Lady, I think you've got the wrong dock." "I don't." She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. "I know what you do. I know your company. I know your reputation on the coast." "Then you know I fix boats. I don't do whatever this is. I know you turned down a buyout offer 2 years ago from a holding company that wanted this property." I went still. "How do you know about that?" "Because the holding company was mine. My cousin Tate controls the family trust right now, and he was moving money before I could stop him." She said it evenly, like she was reading a tide chart. "That offer was too high. You said no anyway." "This was my grandfather's yard." "I know." She looked at the dock, then back at me. "That's why I'm here." I had not thought about that offer in a long time. It came in through 3 different intermediaries over 4 months. Every time I said no, the number went up. I kept saying no because there was no number for what this yard meant, and whoever was on the other end of those emails did not understand that. Most people with that kind of money never did. I stepped closer to her. She did not step back. "You researched me thoroughly before you landed." "Yes." I did not like it. I did not like her knowing my yard, my grandfather, my refusals. "Why me?" Vera's jaw tightened slightly. "My grandfather's estate has a succession clause. If I'm not engaged to be married before the Friday board meeting, controlling interest in Ashworth Pacific passes to Tate for 12 months. That's enough time for him to liquidate the coastal lodges, cancel the heritage ferry licenses, and sell the SS Galliano to a buyer in Seattle who will strip it for parts." I knew the SS Galliano. Everyone in marine restoration on the West Coast knew the Galliano, a 1923 passenger steamship that had run the Inside Passage for 40 years, then sat in a covered berth in North Van for the last decade waiting for someone with the money and the patience to bring her back. She was not gone yet, but she would be. "Why not one of your lawyers? Married or too close to Tate to be safe?" She paused. "Or too easy to buy?" "And I'm what? Not for sale." She said it without drama, just a fact she had already verified. I needed someone independent. Someone Tate can't pressure or discredit. Someone who knows what it means to say no to money. I looked past her at the floatplane rocking gently on the swell. The pilot was looking straight ahead. "What do I get?" I asked. Compensation. Legal protection. A clean agreement with independent oversight. No claim on this yard, no claim on your business. You would be protected going in, while it's happening, and after it ends. I almost laughed. You think I'm asking about money? Something shifted in her face. What are you asking about? The truth, I said. All of it. Tate, the clause, what this really costs, every part you left out because you thought I might say no. She looked at the water for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter. The Galliano was the ship my grandmother took from Victoria to Vancouver the summer she met my grandfather. He was a deckhand. She was traveling alone. They talked for 6 hours on the crossing, and he never went back to being a deckhand after that. She stopped. Tate sees a marine asset with salvage value. He has never set foot on that ship. He doesn't know what she is. The wind pushed a chop against the dock, and the old cedar planks moved under us. Old wood either held or it didn't. It didn't pretend. If this goes wrong, I said, people won't say you chose me for integrity. They'll say you hired someone. I know. My crew gets caught in it too. I know. And when it's done, whatever people think about how it started, that follows me. Yes. She did not flinch. I know all of that. I looked at her for a long moment. The wool coat. The heels with salt spray on them now. The folder she had not put away. All right, I said. I'll hear the rest. She blinked, just once. All right. I've got one condition first. You come to the yard, my shop, my crew. You see what you're asking me to risk before we talk anything official. Vera looked down at the dock planks, then at the water below them. Fine. Not fine, I said. You meet the people this touches. Then we talk next steps. She looked at me for a moment, and something crossed her face that I could not name. Not relief exactly. Something more like recalibration. Okay, Miles Sutton, she said. Behind me. Derek let out a slow breath like a man who had been trying not to speak for 3 minutes. I ignored him. Vera looked at her watch. I need to be back in the city by 5. Then we should move. She looked at me, still standing there in wet boots and a soaked jacket, and for a second I thought she was going to say something about the state of me. She didn't. She just turned toward the yard. I had to change in the site office, which was a glorified shed, with a space heater and a hook on the wall. Clean jeans, a flannel I kept for client meetings, work boots that were slightly less wrecked than the ones I was wearing. I still had fiberglass dust on my forearms, and there was nothing I could do about that. I came back out, and Vera was standing by the bow of the Lennox, the 1952 double-ended ketch we had been working on for 4 months. She was not looking at her phone. She was looking at the boat. She's beautiful, she said when I got close. She will be. Vera turned. She looked at the state of me, then at the boat, then back at me. You cleaned up. I tried. She almost smiled. It did not quite arrive. We took my truck into the shop on the other side of the yard. Derek was already there, along with Phoebe, who had been with me for 6 years and had opinions about everything, and Roderick, who was 62 and had forgotten more about wooden boat construction than most people in the province ever learned. Roderick saw Vera's coat first, then me, then her again. He set down his coffee. Are we being audited? Worse, I said. I might be getting engaged. Phoebe's head came up from behind a workbench. Vera stepped forward. Vera Ashworth. Roderick looked at her for a long time. You're in trouble? Yes, she said. No hesitation, no performance. He nodded once. Then Miles will help. She glanced at me when he said it, and I saw something move through her expression. It was the absence of paperwork that got her. Roderick did not ask about terms or timelines or what was in it for the yard. He just asked the one question that mattered to him. I walked her through the shop, the smell of epoxy and varnish, a half-planed plank on the horses, the old ship drawings pinned to the wall that my grandfather had collected over 40 years. Phoebe's coffee that had been burning since before I arrived, Roderick's handwritten notes about the Lennox's keel, under a magnet on the metal cabinet. These are the people, I told her. Phoebe has a kid in daycare in New West. Roderick has a bad hip he won't talk about, and a pension that doesn't cover everything. Derek just bought his first place in Port Moody. If Tate comes after me, he makes their lives harder. Vera stood in the middle of the shop and looked around. Not quickly, carefully. I understand. You're starting to, I said. She didn't argue. I respected that more than I wanted to. At noon, I was in a small office in Gastown with a lawyer named Miss Chartrand, who had the particular energy of someone who charged by the minute and didn't mind you knowing it. She walked me through the agreement while Vera waited in the hall and did not once open the glass door. "You understand, this is not a typical arrangement," Miss Chartrand said. "I got that. You also understand that if both parties enter knowingly and willingly, it's entirely legal." "I understand." She looked at my hands, which still had traces of fiberglass under the nails. She did not comment. I appreciated that. By 2 in the afternoon we were in a government office in downtown Vancouver, which is less romantic than a courthouse, but functionally identical. No flowers, no family, no music. Just our 2 lawyers, a commissioner, and the low hum of an HVAC system that needed servicing. The commissioner looked up from the paperwork. "You both understand the legal nature of this engagement and the intent to marry?" "Yes," Vera said. "Apparently," I said. The commissioner looked at me over his glasses. I cleared my throat. "Yes, sir." Vera's mouth moved, just slightly at the corner. Then the commissioner asked if we had a ring. Vera went still. Her lawyer murmured something and she gave him a look that could have stripped varnish. I reached into my jacket pocket. "I've got something." I opened my hand. It was a small compass, silver, about the size of a 50-cent coin, the kind you could clip to a watch chain. My grandfather had carried it on every boat he ever worked on. He gave it to me the week before he died, and told me it always pointed home. I had moved it from key ring to jacket pocket the morning I left the yard, without really knowing why. Vera looked at it like I had handed her something she wasn't sure she was allowed to hold. "It's not a ring," I said, "but it's real." She picked it up carefully. Her fingers were not quite steady. She held it for a moment, then placed it in my palm and closed my fingers around it. "Keep it safe," she said quietly. When we walked out into the afternoon, the clouds over the north shore had broken up, and the light on the water was that particular gold that only happens on the coast in late October. Vera stood on the sidewalk and looked at it. "We should get to the building," she said. "Yeah." She looked at me. "Thank you. For this morning, the yard, the crew." She paused. "Roderick." "He meant it," I said. "I know." She picked up her bag. "That's what got me." The Ashworth Pacific Board met in a building on West Georgia that smelled like carpet shampoo and old ambition. Tate was already there when we arrived. He was about 40, good suit, the kind of easy confidence that came from never having had to talk someone out of repossessing something. His eyes moved over me the way people do when they're deciding how much something costs. "Vera," he said, "this is creative, even for you." She set the engagement registration on the table. "The clause is satisfied." Tate laughed quietly. "You found a boat builder, marine restoration contractor," I said. The room went quiet. Tate looked at me. "I'm sorry?" "Marine restoration contractor," I said again. "If you're going to dismiss me, use the full title." One of the older board members, a woman named Dr. Elspeth Tanaka, who had been on the Ashworth board since before Tate was in high school, looked down at her notepad in a way that suggested she was hiding something. Tate leaned back. "And what exactly did she offer you, Mr. Sutton?" "Nothing that would matter to you." "Money matters to everyone. Then you must be simple to read." Vera put one hand briefly on my arm under the table. I understood that meant stop. I stopped. Partially. Tate spread his hands. "You expect us to take this seriously?" "I expect the legal record to speak," I said. "That seems like your problem to deal with." Vera's lawyer, a composed man named Mr. Okafor, stepped in exactly on time with the documentation. The engagement registration, the timeline, the independent legal certifications. Dr. Tanaka read everything twice, slowly, with the reading glasses she pulled from her jacket pocket. Tate watched Vera the entire time. "You've turned this family into a spectacle." Vera's voice stayed level. "No. I kept you from selling the coast by Thursday." That one hit the room differently than anything else said that afternoon. Dr. Tanaka folded her hands. "The clause has been met. Controlling interest remains with Vera Ashworth, pending the full succession review." Tate stood, buttoned his jacket, and looked at me. "Enjoy the engagement." I looked back at him. "Enjoy watching." Vera caught my sleeve under the table again. Tate left. For about 4 minutes I thought we had done it. Then Vera's phone lit up, then her lawyer's. Then Dr. Tanaka's assistant pushed the boardroom door open with an expression that meant something had already gone wrong outside these walls. Vera turned the screen toward me. A Vancouver lifestyle blog. My name final spelled correctly. Hers in bold. Ashworth Heiress's rushed engagement slammed as trust clause workaround by family source. Tate, she said. Outside the boardroom windows, there were already people with phones gathered near the building entrance. Her driver called to say there were cameras outside her condo building on Beach Avenue. The story was moving faster than we had. Vera stood very still, looking at the screen. She was doing the calculation. 10 problems at once, in the right order, without showing it on her face. I picked up her bag from the chair beside her and held it out. Paper got you through the clause, I said. Paper's not gonna get you through this. She looked at me. Pack a bag, I told her. You're staying at the yard. Vera showed up at 9:30 with one rolling suitcase, a garment bag, a canvas tote, with what turned out to be 3 weeks' worth of legal files, and the expression of someone who had handled difficult things all day and was now being asked to handle a gravel driveway in the dark. The house behind the yard was not large. My grandfather had built it to be close to work, not to impress anyone. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen with a window over the inlet, a living room that was mostly bookshelves and one good lamp, and a back porch where I drank my coffee in the morning and watched the water. That was it. Vera stepped inside and looked around. It's not the Ashworth Cove, she said. No. She looked at me. I didn't mean that as a criticism. You kind of did. She exhaled. I meant it was honest. Guest room is down the hall. Window latch sticks, lift and push at the same time. The shower pressure drops if someone runs water in the yard. Coffee maker is a French press. If you don't let it steep long enough, it tastes like regret. She looked at me for a moment. You've had practice explaining this place to people, just to people who don't usually sleep this close to a boatyard. She picked up her suitcase herself before I could. I'll figure it out. That first week was not what anyone would call a honeymoon. It was Vera at my kitchen table, with her files in neat stacks, while I ate food from containers. It was Roderick answering the yard's phone with increasing irritation, because journalists had somehow found the number. It was Phoebe starting every morning, by scanning local news, before I even got my boots on. It was Derek putting a handwritten sign on the gate that said private property no comment, in letters large enough to read from the street, which I told him was unnecessary, and which he left up anyway. At night, Vera worked, and I worked, and we were mostly in the same room without particularly being together. She slept in the guest room. I slept badly in mine. It was not romantic. There was no soundtrack. Nobody moved slowly toward anyone in a hallway. Mostly it was me coming in from the yard to find her on a call with Mr. Okafor, or her, stepping over my boots by the back door for the 3rd time and saying nothing, which somehow said everything. But things shifted. Slowly, in small ways. She figured out the French press on day 3. I know because she brought me a cup without asking and left it on the workbench without saying anything. And it was steeped correctly. I found out later, she had asked Roderick. I found out she took her coffee black until she was tired, and then added too much honey, and pretended she had not changed anything. She started leaving her coat on the same hook every night, like she had decided that was its place. One morning I came in from the yard and found her in the kitchen, in jeans, and one of the old yard fleeces we kept on a peg by the door for cold mornings. It was too big on her. She did not acknowledge it. I did not say anything. One night I came in late and found her on a chair in the guest room, arms stretched to the ceiling, fighting with the window latch. It's stuck, she said. I told you. Lift and push. I am lifting and pushing. You're pulling. She stopped. I'm not. I crossed the room and showed her. The window gave on the first try and opened about 5 inches. She looked at it like it had made a choice she disagreed with. I'll fix it properly this time, I said. You said that 4 days ago. I've been busy being publicly engaged. She looked over her shoulder at me, and that time she actually laughed. Not performed, not polite. Surprised out of her, like it caught her off guard. The next morning, she brought coffee to the whole crew. Not from the French press. She had walked to the place on Esplanade and come back with a tray and everyone's names written on the cups, which meant she had asked someone the day before and remembered. Phoebe took her cup, read her name, and looked at me with an expression I chose not to react to. She remembered, Phoebe said later. She asked Derek. She still remembered. Phoebe went back to what she was doing. She's not what I thought. What did you think? Rich problem. She is a rich problem. Yeah, Phoebe said, but she listens. A week later I took Vera to see the SS Galliano. She sat in a covered berth in North Van. The old steel hull streaked with rust and age but still straight. The interior had been stripped years ago, but the bones were there, the original staircase. The windows along the salon that would have shown the inside passage to passengers who probably did not look up enough. The deck planking that needed full replacement but whose shape, under all the rot, was still the original intention. Vera stood at the stern and went quiet. I walked her through what I saw. The structural frames that were still sound. The bulkheads that had held. The places where someone had patched instead of repaired, which was always the problem. People who didn't want to know how bad it was. This beam here, I said, putting my hand on the original keel timber, is Douglas fir, probably 100-year-old growth. You can't buy this anymore. Anyone who tells you to rip it out and start over is selling you something easier for them and worse for the ship. Vera ran her hand along the wall beside her. My grandmother used to say the Galliano smelled like the coast, cedar and salt and engine oil. She said you could close your eyes anywhere on the ship and know exactly where you were. That's what good restoration is, I said, giving a thing back its memory. She turned to look at me, and I could not read her face the way I usually couldn't when she was deciding something. What? I asked. My family has owned this ship since 1962, she said. I don't think anyone has ever talked about her the way you just did. After that, things between us changed. Not dramatically, not with a speech, just differently. She started correcting my emails before I sent client proposals. You sound like you're annoyed in this paragraph, she said one evening, sitting beside me at the table with her reading glasses on. I am annoyed. They want me to use synthetic materials on a 1940s hull. They're still paying you. That doesn't make them right. No, she said, but it means you can afford to be patient and right at the same time. She revised 3 sentences. I read them. You made me sound reasonable. You're welcome. I fixed the guest room window the next afternoon. She stood beside me while I worked, handing me screws with more confidence than accuracy, which I found funnier than I let on. When it was done, she tested it 4 times, methodically. Good, she said. I kept the compass in my jacket pocket. At first, I told myself it was habit, or appearances. Tate's people were still watching. There were still occasional photographers near the yard gate. And Dr. Tanaka had mentioned that the board would be monitoring the relationship's credibility over the next few months. That was a real reason, but there were nights with no one around, long after Tate's story had stopped running, when I could have moved it back to the shelf where I kept my grandfather's things. I didn't. 6 weeks in, Tate filed for an emergency review. His argument was simple. The engagement was a construct. Vera had manipulated the succession clause with a paid arrangement. I was a prop in work boots. Vera arrived with Mr. Okafor and the full documentation. I arrived 20 minutes late from a site visit in Steveston, still in a work shirt, compass in my pocket. Tate saw it. I watched him register it. The questioning was structured and careful. Where did we live? How were our finances managed? Did we have a genuine intention to marry? Or had the engagement served its purpose and been quietly shelved? Vera's back straightened. Before she could answer, I leaned forward. That depends, I said. Tate's eyes sharpened. On what, Mr. Sutton? On whether Vera stops leaving her legal files on my half of the kitchen table. I had a system before she moved in. Now every time I set down my coffee, I'm putting it on a deposition summary. Nobody spoke for a moment. Dr. Tanaka looked at the table in a way that suggested she was studying the grain of the wood very carefully. Vera looked down. I saw the corner of her mouth move. It was true. That was the thing. It sounded real because it was real. Not in the way you could put in a legal document, but in the way that mattered. The way her reading glasses ended up on the kitchen windowsill because the light was better there. The way she knew which burner on the stove ran hot. The way I had started listening for the sound of the floatplane when she had early morning meetings and came back by water. The board denied Tate's request. Afterward, Vera and I were left in an empty hallway while the lawyers finished their paperwork. Mr. Okafor had stepped out. No one was watching. Vera stood with her arms folded and her eyes on the polished floor. "You didn't have to make it sound real," she said. "I didn't make it sound anything." She turned to look at me, slowly. There was no boardroom table between us, no process, no agenda. Just a quiet hallway and 6 weeks of something we had both been careful not to name. "Miles," she said, and it sounded different from how she had said it on the dock. I did not get to answer. She stepped forward and put one hand against my jacket, over my chest, where the compass was in the pocket, and she kissed me. It was not for the board. It was not for Tate. It was not for any clause in any document her grandfather had ever signed. It was the first thing between us that did not have a purpose, that belonged only to the hallway and to us. She pulled back and looked at me, and I could see she had surprised herself. "We should probably leave this building," I said, "before someone charges us for the time." She laughed, that same surprised, real laugh that had come out of her the night of the window. Her hand stayed on my jacket for one more second. On the drive back to the yard, she sat in the passenger seat of my truck instead of taking the car her office had sent. Her shoulder was close to mine. Every red light on the Granville Bridge felt longer than it was. When we got back, she set her bag on the kitchen table and stood there in the way she had in the beginning, like she was letting me decide what happened next. "We should not move fast just because the paperwork moved fast," I said. She looked at me. "I was hoping you would say that. Don't look too relieved." "I'm not relieved. I'm tired of things happening to me instead of things I choose. So we did it the way that made sense." Slowly. She stayed in the guest room for another few weeks. I still made coffee she had to fix. She still edited my emails and pretended she was only helping the business. But when she walked past my chair at the table, her hand would touch my shoulder. When I came in late from the yard, she looked up from whatever she was reading, and even though she didn't say anything, I knew she had been listening for the sound of the gate. Some evenings we sat on the back porch with the yard settling in the dark and the lights of the North Shore, on the water, and talked about nothing Tate could use. The Galliano, the Lennox. The things Roderick had said about old growth timber and why you couldn't rush a hull repair, the way my grandfather used to say that a boat either wanted to float or it didn't, and that the job was figuring out which one was true. The engagement stopped feeling like a strategy. It became a habit, then a choice, then something I could not imagine putting back in a folder and filing away. Tate kept moving for a few more weeks, but his options got smaller every time the board met. The documentation held. The relationship held. Ashworth Pacific stayed intact. The coastal lodge licenses were renewed. The Galliano's birth contract was extended while restoration funding was sourced. One evening in late November, I came home from a site in Cole Harbor and found Vera at the kitchen table with nothing in front of her. No files, no laptop, no phone face-up. Just one folder, closed, in the center of the table. She had changed out of her work clothes. She was wearing jeans and the yard fleece again, the big one from the hook by the door. Her hair was down. Her face had that particular calm she used when she had already felt something hard and had decided she was finished feeling it for now. The folder sat between us. "What's that?" I said, though I already knew. She pushed it toward the empty chair. Inside were annulment papers. The kitchen was quiet except for the French press on the counter and the sound of the inlet wind against the back of the house. Vera folded her hands on the table. "The terms are clean. Mr. Okafor reviewed everything, and I had Miss Chartrand look it over independently. Your yard, your house, your company, untouched. No penalty, no public record, no statement required unless you want one." I looked at the folder. "You rehearsed that?" "Yes." "How many times?" "More than I'd like to tell you." I pulled out the chair and sat across from her. She kept going. "The clause has been satisfied. Tate's last challenge failed. The board is stable. You did what I asked and more than I had any right to ask. I don't want you staying because this started with a problem and you felt responsible for seeing it through. I watched her hold everything in place, because that was Vera. She always gave you the cleanest version of the hard thing first. She thought that was kindness, and it was. But it was also a way of not asking for what she actually wanted. You think that's what I'm doing? I asked. Finishing something because I started it? I think you're loyal, she said. And I think loyal people sometimes can't tell the difference between staying out of duty and staying because they mean it. That was the most honest thing she had said to me since the dock. I opened the folder. First page, names, dates, legal description. A clean exit from something that had become nothing like clean. My grandfather's compass was in my jacket on the hook by the door. I looked at the jacket. Vera saw me look. You can keep the compass, she said quickly. That was never part of any of this. I closed the folder and pushed it back across the table. No, I said. She looked up. No. I leaned forward. You stepped off a floatplane in heels onto a working dock and asked me for the truth before I agreed to anything. I held you to that. Here's mine. I don't want my kitchen table back. I don't want the guest room empty. I don't want to drink French press coffee that's slightly wrong every morning and not know why it's wrong anymore. I don't want to hear what happens to the Galliano from someone else. I don't want to put that compass back on a shelf and pretend it was just something we used to get through 6 weeks of board meetings. Her eyes went bright. I was trying to be fair to you, she said quietly. I know. I reached across and moved the folder to the side of the table. You had a simple life before I landed in it. You had a quiet life before I landed on your dock, she said. Quiet isn't the same as enough. She looked at the folder, then pushed it the rest of the way off the table. Not dramatically. Just with one hand, like she was done with it. I don't want out either, she said. Write in the comments, was Vera right to give me a clean way out, or should she have trusted that I was staying because I wanted to? That was the moment the arrangement ended. Not in a government office, not in a boardroom, not because a succession clause said it could. It ended at my kitchen table, with the yard quiet outside, and the North Shore lights on the water, and Vera wearing the old yard fleece like she had decided she lived there. Because she did. Life after that did not become simpler, it became ours. The Galliano restoration moved into its first funded phase in the spring. Roderick led the structural assessment and told anyone who asked that the keel was sounder than he expected, which from Roderick was practically poetry. Phoebe managed 3 new contracts that came in after Ashworth Pacific publicly partnered with Whitmore Marine Restoration, which was not something either Vera or I had planned, and which Derek celebrated by finally fixing the gate sign so it said something true. Vera kept Ashworth Pacific intact, not by becoming someone different, but by becoming clearer about who she was, when to push, when to wait, and when to let the record speak before the room caught up. A year later, we had a real engagement. No board agenda, no legal filing, no succession clause. I asked her on the stern deck of the Galliano on a morning in October, when the tide was coming in, and the light on the inlet was that same gold it had been the afternoon we left the government office. I had the compass in my hand. She said yes before I finished the question. The wedding was the following summer, on the Galliano's restored upper deck, with the inside passage on one side and the mountains on the other, the heart of the old ship, holding us up the way she had been holding people since 1923. Roderick stood near the front and did not cry, technically, but did spend an unusual amount of time looking at the horizon. Phoebe wore a dress she complained about for 2 weeks beforehand, and looked wonderful. Derek gave a toast that was exactly 3 sentences long and landed perfectly. Vera walked toward me without the slate coat, without the leather folder, without any of the armor she had brought onto my dock that first morning. Just herself. When the time came, I gave her the compass. She held it in both hands the way she had in the government office, carefully like it mattered. Then she put it in her own pocket and told me she was keeping it. Later, when people asked how we had started, she always went quiet for just a second before she answered. Not because it was a hard question. Because she was still a little amazed that a floatplane and a rotted dock plank and a man with fiberglass dust on his hands had turned into the thing she hadn't known she was looking for. I needed a fiancé by Friday, she always said. and I always told them the rest.